Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Night Teeth. Night Teeth is an American comedy horror that tells the story of a man named Benny, who lives in the Boyle Heights area of Los Angeles and is assigned the task of driving as a chauffeur for one night in his brother's stead. Benny picks up his passengers only to find out that they're both vampires who are planning to travel from one destination to another, killing other vampires. Benny soon finds himself in quite a predicament as he has to deal with vampire hunters who are hot on his trail, navigate the dark underworld he's suddenly been thrust into, and of course, avoid becoming a late night snack to his passengers. It's great to see that there's a lot of variables at play in the movie's story within the first few minutes. The setting is set up in stylish fashion, and there's an intriguing narration that provides further context to the movie's world. Unfortunately, once characters are introduced, things start to unravel a bit. The main character of Benny is played by Jorge Lendeborg Jr., whose performance is adequately likable, and he does get the job done, but there's nothing to really latch onto with his character. He's a blank slate who stays blank for pretty much the whole movie. He does have one interest in the form of creating music that is demonstrated a couple times, but it's never focused on long enough to properly sink in. The vast majority of his time in this movie is spent driving around the vampires from point A to point B, and even that gets dicey because his motivations are constantly changing throughout the story. He shifts back and forth between having to escape and then wanting to help the vampires on their quest multiple times, and this made it hard for me to follow along with what exactly Benny was trying to accomplish. This being said, I do like the family backstory he has in that his half-brother Jay is a vampire hunter and Benny's being raised alone by his grandmother. His family's situation and upbringing makes him at least somewhat sympathetic, and his brother adds extra stakes to the story. No pun intended. As for the other characters, it's a bit of hit or miss. Blair is one half of the vampire team who Benny drives around LA with, and I thought she was great. She added a much needed layer of humor to help offset the violent nature of the storyline, and she has fantastic chemistry with Benny that leads to a predictable but nonetheless enjoyable romance. Zoe, the other half of the vampire team, was quite fun as well. She plays up her vampirism on camera in an entertaining way, and her interactions with Benny are hilarious. One line of dialogue that sticks out to me in this regard, and I'm gonna be PG on this one, is when she tells him that he wouldn't know a good party if it effed him in the mouth. Characters outside of the vehicle don't have as much in the way of memorability though. The main villain, Victor, looks, sounds, and acts like every other vampire villain I've ever seen. His motives are just as bland as well, as he sends Zoe and Blair throughout LA to murder all the vampire lords so he can go about feeding unhinged. And speaking of the vampire lords, I feel like there was a lot of wasted potential with those characters too. They all have unique looks and backstories, but we only see them in one scene each. Two in particular are performed in notable cameos by Sydney Sweeney and Megan Fox, and both of them are enjoyable, but we have little time to fully appreciate them. This leads me to talk about the lore that surrounds this movie's world, which I feel is important to establish in any fantasy setting, however modern it may be. I think the movie does put a reasonable amount of effort in as far as explaining the presence of vampirism in LA, but there are a few things I still take issue with. The rules for vampires in the area, as far as I can recall, is that they can coexist with humans provided that they only feed on those humans who consent to being fed on and that they stay within their boundaries. The boundaries in this movie concern the Boyle Heights area, as I already mentioned, although it is implied that there are other vampire boundaries in other parts of the world too. I like it when a movie expands upon its world in this way. It breathes more life into the story and can potentially expand the world beyond its confined runtime and leave the door open for sequels in the future. The world is further developed with ranks of hierarchy, as previously mentioned with the vampire lords turning humans into subservient blood factories, and also with the Night Legion, who are the group of vampire hunters I mentioned earlier who are dedicated to quelling vampire numbers. All these things help to make Night Teeth stand out just a little bit from the crowd. However, while I'm glad these things are present, I feel they're not fully explained. The number of factions that are involved by the end of the movie's story becomes confusing to keep track of because they all start to look the same. Benny's brother Jay disappointed me in this regard because despite being a vampire hunter, he seems to be separate from Night Legion, but it's never confirmed. There's also this red jewel that Benny uses to inadvertently gain access to a private feeding hotel for vampires, and there's no reason given as to why it's important, which is weird considering how random it was that Benny was able to come across that jewel in the first place. The big things that prop up this movie's setting are there, but they require more polish. One thing that doesn't need polish though is its technical presentation. For a movie that mostly takes place at night, you'd think it would be a challenge to pull off so many creative scenes and shots. Fortunately though, that's not the case for this movie. Different types of lights from bright neon to muted colors subtly cover the sinister areas of Los Angeles, ranging from bad neighborhoods to sketchy clubs, which heightens the atmosphere and danger of Benny's world wherever he goes. Many scenes are also aided by a catchy synth soundtrack which further enhances the ambience. But sometimes the movie goes a little overboard with its creativity. There's a lot of spinning camera shots in which the camera zooms in while rotating in a circular motion, and in my opinion there's no reasoning behind it. These types of shots appear most often when the characters are sitting still, not doing anything, just generally minding their own business, or when they're vibing and in the middle of a conversation with someone. Either way, it's distracting to the story that I'm trying to pay attention to. Nevertheless, I will admit that it is nice to take a break from the story, especially where the action is concerned. The few action scenes that are there are bloody, have good fight choreography, and aren't overly lengthy, so they never outstay their welcome. You could think of them as bite-sized in nature. That pun, by the way, was intended. I do think it's a shame that the movie doesn't capitalize on its R rating. Even though we see a fair amount of blood, it's not all that horrifying, and characters die in relatively mundane ways, such as humans being bitten to death on the neck, to vampires burning alive in sunlight. For a movie with such creative potential behind it, it's disappointing to see it lacking in this area. Overall, Night Teeth is a passable horror comedy that has a running theme with its capability. The structures are set in place for a memorable story, but as it is now, they aren't completely finished. If you enjoy horror movies with a comedic side to them, especially if they involve vampires, this one should satisfy your bloodlust, if only for a little while. There were many moments when watching this movie that impressed me, and just as many that left me wanting more. It has great aesthetic presentation and some world building, but needs more development with its characters and lore. It's a textbook example of style over substance, so ultimately it never gets the chance to fully sink its fangs in. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Night Teeth. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the South African romantic comedy, Little Big Mouth. Bye bye!